Well, social psychology, as interesting as that may be, so let's go ahead and get started and see what's going on. There we go. We get to see a lot of people's feet, and everybody's on their phone. Social psychology examines how people affect one another, and it looks at the power of the situation. Social psychologists are interested in all aspects of personality and social interaction, exploring the influence of interpersonal and group relationships on human behavior. People will change their behavior to align with the social situation at hand. If we are in a new situation or are unsure of how to behave, we will take our cues from other individuals. Just like in that picture, everybody standing around playing on their phones. They must be doing the right thing because everybody's doing the same thing. The field of social psychology studies topics at both the intra and interpersonal levels. Interpersonal topics, those that pertain to the individual, include emotions and attitudes, the self, and social cognition, the ways in which we think about ourselves and others. Interpersonal topics, those that pertain to dyads and groups, dyad is just two people, include helping behavior, die meaning two, of course, include helping behavior, aggression, prejudice, and discrimination, attraction and close relationships, and group processes and intergroup relationships. Social psychologists focus on how people conceptualize and interpret situations and how these interpretations influence our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Thus, social psychology studies individuals in a social context and how situational variables interact to influence behavior. Me, me, Behavior is a product of both the situation, for example, cultural influences, social roles, and the presence of bystanders, and the person, for example, personality characteristics. Subfields of psychology tend to focus on one influence or behavior over others. Situationism is the view that our behavior and actions are determined by our immediate environment and our surroundings. Dispositionism holds that our behavior is determined by internal factors. An internal factor is an attribute of a person and includes personality traits and temperament. Social psychologists have tended to take the situationist perspective, whereas personality psychologists have promoted the dispositionist perspective. Modern approaches to social psychology, however, take both the situation and the individual into account when studying human behavior. In fact, the field of social personality psychology has emerged to study the complex interaction of internal and situational factors that affect human behavior. And I think that's Britney Spears, if I'm not mistaken. Well, maybe I am mistaken. Can't tell. She's holding her nose. The fundamental attribution error is a tendency for people to overemphasize dispositional or personality-based explanations for behaviors observed in others while underemphasizing situational explanations. In other words, people have a cognitive bias to assume that a person's actions depend on what kind of person that person is, rather than on the social and environmental factors that influence the person. Halo effect is a tendency for positive impressions of a person, company, brand, or product in one area to positively influence one's opinion or feelings in other areas. Halo effect is the name given to the phenomenon whereby evaluators tend to be influenced by their previous judgments of performance or personality. The halo effect, which is a cognitive bias, can possibly prevent someone from accepting a person, a product, or a brand based on the idea of an unfounded belief in what is good or bad. And that is a point of fact. The halo effect. Why are pretty people better than people that aren't so pretty? Why are they better? People from individualistic cultures have the greatest tendency to commit fundamental attribution error. In contrast, people from collectivist cultures, a culture that focuses on communal relationships with others, such as family, friends, and community, are less likely to commit the fundamental attribution error. Due to a lack of information, people have a tendency to assume that others' behavior is due to a dispositional or internal factor. When it comes to explaining our own behaviors, however, we have much more information available to us. The actor-observer bias is the phenomenon of attributing other people's behavior to internal factors, fundamental attribution error, while attributing our own behavior to situational forces. As actors of behavior, we have more information available to explain our own behavior. However, as observers, we have less information available, therefore we tend to default to a dispositionist perspective. Why are you always so anxious to criticize me? I just think I have a knack for seeing other people's faults. What about your own faults? I have a knack for overlooking them. That Lucy. Self-serving bias is a tendency to explain our successes as due to dispositional internal characteristics, but to explain our failures as due to situational external factors. This seems to be culture dependent. This bias serves to protect self-esteem. You can imagine that if people always made situational attributions for their behavior, they would never be able to take credit and feel good about their accomplishments. Yay, A+, I'm so smart. F grade, she doesn't like me. Oh, that's probably true. A common ideology or worldview in the United States is the just world hypothesis. The just world hypothesis is the belief that people get the outcomes that they deserve. In order to maintain a belief that the world is a fair place, people tend to think that good people experience positive outcomes and bad people experience negative outcomes. The ability to think of the world as a fair place where people get what they deserve allows us to feel that the world is predictable and that we have some control over our life outcomes. There is no justice in the world. There is some justice in the world. The world is just. It all depends on whether you're the big fish or the little fish. Social psychology is the study of how people affect one another's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. One major social determinant of human behavior is our social roles. A social role is a pattern of behavior that is expected of a person in a given setting or group. Each one of us has several social roles, and these are examples of social roles: aunt, cousin, neighbor, financial consultant, boss, daughter, coach, friend, lawyer, soccer mom, cook, consumer, chauffeur. Social roles are defined by a culture's shared knowledge of what is expected behavior of an individual in a specific role. This shared knowledge comes from social norms. A social norm is a group's expectation of what is appropriate and acceptable behavior for its members, how they are supposed to behave and think. And this is an example of a social norm that this couple is going against, and we want to explain why short men can't be with a tall woman. Tall men are with short women. Why can't short men be with tall women? But it doesn't look right. Because of social roles, people tend to know what behavior is expected of them in specific familiar settings. A script is a person's knowledge about the sequence of events expected in a specific setting. Scripts are important sources of information to guide behavior in given situations. The famous Stanford prison experiment conducted by social psychologist Philip Zimbardo and his colleagues at Stanford University demonstrated the power of social roles, social norms, and scripts. In the summer of 1971, an advertisement was placed in a California newspaper asking for male volunteers to participate in a study about the psychological effects of prison life, and this is Philip Zimbardo. More than 70 men volunteered, and these volunteers then underwent psychological testing to eliminate candidates who had underlying psychiatric issues, medical issues, or a history of crime or drug abuse. The pool of volunteers was whittled down to 24 healthy male college students. Each student was paid $15 per day, equivalent to about $80 today, and was randomly assigned to play the role of either a prisoner or a guard in the study. A mock prison was constructed in the basement of the psychology building at Stanford. Participants assigned to play the role of prisoners were arrested at their homes by Palo Alto police officers, booked at a police station, and subsequently taken to the mock prison. The experiment was scheduled to run for several weeks. To the surprise of the researchers, both the prisoners and the guards assumed their roles with zeal. On the second day of the experiment, the guards forced the prisoners to strip, took their beds, and isolated the ringleaders using solitary confinement. In a relatively short time, the guards came to harass the prisoners in an increasingly sadistic manner through a complete lack of privacy, lack of basic comforts such as mattresses to sleep on, and through degrading chores and late-night counts. The prisoners began to show signs of severe anxiety and hopelessness. They began tolerating the guards' abuse. Even the Stanford professor who designed the study and was the head researcher, Philip Zimbardo, found himself acting as if the prison was real, and his role as prison supervisor was real as well. After only 6 days, the experiment had to be ended due to the participants' deteriorating behavior. Zimbardo explained, at this point it became clear that we had to end the study. We had created an overwhelmingly powerful situation, a situation in which prisoners were withdrawing and behaving in pathological ways, and in which some of the guards were behaving sadistically. Even the good guards felt helpless to intervene, and none of the guards quit while the study was in progress. Indeed, it should be noted that no guard ever came late for his shift, called in sick, left early, or demanded extra pay for overtime work. The Stanford prison experiment demonstrated the power of social roles, norms, and scripts in affecting human behavior. The guards and prisoners enacted their social roles by engaging in behaviors appropriate to the roles. The guards gave orders and the prisoners followed orders. Social norms require guards to be authoritarian and prisoners to be submissive. When prisoners rebelled, they violated these social norms, which led to upheaval. The specific acts engaged by the guards and the prisoners derived from scripts. The Stanford prison experiment has some parallels with the abuse of prisoners of war by U.S. Army troops and CIA personnel at the Abu Ghraib prison in 2003 and 2004 during the Iraq War. The offenses at Abu Ghraib were documented by photographs of the abuse, some taken by the abusers themselves. The power of the situation can influence our attitudes and beliefs. Attitude is our evaluation of a person, an idea, or an object. We have attitudes for many things, ranging from products that we might pick up in the supermarket to people around the world to political policies. Typically, attitudes are favorable or unfavorable, positive or negative. They have three components: an affective component, feelings, a behavioral component, the effect of the attitude on behavior, and a cognitive component, belief and knowledge. You may hold a positive attitude toward recycling. This attitude should result in positive feelings toward recycling, such as, it makes me feel good to recycle, or I enjoy knowing that I make a small difference in reducing the amount of waste that ends up in landfills. Certainly, this attitude should be reflected in our behavior. You actually recycle as often as you can. Finally, this attitude will be reflected in favorable thoughts. For example, recycling is good for the environment, or recycling is the responsible thing to do. Social psychologists have documented that feeling good about ourselves and maintaining positive self-esteem is a powerful motivator of human behavior. In the United States, members of the predominant culture predictably think very highly of themselves and view themselves as good people who are above average on many desirable traits. There you go. Give yourself a pat on the back. Often our behavior, attitudes, and beliefs are affected when we experience a threat to our self-esteem or positive self-image. Psychologist Leon Festinger in 1957 defined cognitive dissonance as psychological discomfort arising from holding two or more inconsistent attitudes, behaviors, or cognitions, thoughts, beliefs, or opinions. Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance states that when we experience a conflict in our behaviors, attitudes, or beliefs that runs counter to our positive self-concepts, perceptions, we experience psychological discomfort or dissonance. Oh no. When we experience a cognitive dissonance, we are motivated to decrease it because it is psychologically, physically, and mentally uncomfortable. We can reduce cognitive dissonance by bringing our cognitions, attitudes, and behaviors in line, that is, making them harmonious. That's what we need to do, make them harmonious. This can be done in different ways, such as changing our discrepant behavior, changing our cognitions through rationalization or denial, adding a new cognition. There you go. A difficult initiation into a group influences us to like the group more. Justification of effort suggests that we value goals and achievements that we put a lot of effort into. If something is difficult for us to achieve, we believe it is more worthwhile. Somebody's stupid. Persuasion is the process of changing our attitude towards something based on some kind of communication. Much of the persuasion we experience comes from outside forces. A subfield of social psychology studies persuasion and social influence, providing us with a plethora of information on how humans can be persuaded by others. There you go. Carl Hovland developed the Yale Attitude Change Approach, which describes the conditions under which people tend to change their attitudes. Hovland demonstrated that certain features of the source of a persuasive message, the content of the message, and the characteristics of the audience will influence the persuasiveness of the message. And this was research done that Hovland and his colleagues did in 1953. Features of the source of the persuasive message include the credibility of the speaker. Thus, speakers who are credible or have expertise on the topic and who are deemed as trustworthy are more persuasive than less credible speakers. Features of the source of the persuasive message include the physical attractiveness of the speaker. Thus, more attractive speakers are more persuasive than less attractive speakers. Features of the message itself that affect persuasion include subtlety, the quality of being important but not obvious, sidedness, that is, having more than one side, timing, and whether both sides are presented. Messages that are more subtle are more persuasive than direct messages. Arguments that occur first, such as in a debate, are more influential if messages are given back to back. However, if there is a delay after the first message and before the audience needs to make a decision, the last message presented will tend to be more persuasive. Features of the audience that affect persuasion are attention, intelligence, self-esteem, and age. In order to be persuaded, audience members must be paying attention. People with lower intelligence are more easily persuaded than people with higher intelligence, whereas people with moderate self-esteem are more easily persuaded than people with higher or lower self-esteem. Younger adults, aged 18 to 25, are more persuadable than older adults. Elaboration likelihood model is an especially popular model that describes the dynamics of persuasion. The elaboration likelihood model considers the variables of the attitude change approach, that is, features of the source of the persuasive message, contents of the message, and characteristics of the audience are used to determine when attitude change will occur. According to the elaboration likelihood model of persuasion, there are two main routes that play a role in delivering a persuasive message: the central route and the peripheral route. The central route is logic-driven and uses data and facts to convince people of an argument's worthiness. This is a direct route to persuasion that focuses on the quality of the information. In order for the central route of persuasion to be effective in changing attitudes, thoughts, and behaviors, the argument must be strong and, if successful, will result in lasting attitude change. The central route to persuasion works best when the target of persuasion or the audience is analytical and willing to engage in processing of the information, like Spock. The peripheral route is an indirect route that uses peripheral cues to associate positivity with the message. Instead of focusing on the facts and a product's quality, the peripheral route relies on association with positive characteristics such as positive emotions and celebrity endorsement. This route to attitude change does not require much effort or information processing. This method of persuasion may promote positivity toward the message or product, but it typically results in less permanent attitude or behavior change. The audience does not need to be analytical or motivated to process the message. There you go. That's Buble. A peripheral, not the guy, the drink. It's bubble. A peripheral route to persuasion may not even be noticed by the audience. For example, in the strategy of product placement. Product placement refers to putting a product with a clear brand name or brand identity in a TV show or movie to promote the product, and that's what's happened with Coca-Cola. This is America's Got Talent or something. I never watched these shows. I didn't realize Coca-Cola had product placement. Researchers have tested many persuasion strategies that are effective in selling products and changing people's attitude, ideas, and behaviors. One effective strategy is the foot in the door technique. Using the foot in the door technique, the persuader gets a person to agree to bestow a small favor or buy a small item, only to later request a larger favor or purchase of a bigger item. This technique also illustrates the principle of consistency. Our past behavior often directs our future behavior, and we have a desire to maintain consistency once we have committed to a behavior. Mom, can I set fire to my bed mattress? No, Calvin. Can I ride my tricycle on the roof? No, Calvin. Then can I have a cookie? No, Calvin. Foot in the door technique. Solomon Asch conducted several experiments in the 1950s to determine how people are affected by the thoughts and behaviors of other people. In one study, a group of participants were shown a series of printed line segments of different lengths, A, B, and C. Participants were then shown a fourth line segment, X. They were asked to identify which line segment from the first group, A, B, or C, most closely resembled the fourth line segment in the length. And this is Solomon Asch right here. And of course, these are the lines. This is A, B, and C, and this is X. And obviously, X and A are very similar. So that's the experiment. Or the experiment actually had to do with the fact that Asch had Confederates in the room, and they would get it wrong sometimes to see if the one person in the room who wasn't a Confederate, who was the subject, would conform to what they said. Each group of participants had only one true naive subject. The remaining members of the group were Confederates, said the researcher. Okay. Confederates are used to manipulate social situations as part of the research design. In Asch's study, the Confederates identified a line segment that was obviously shorter than the target line, a wrong answer. The naive participant then had to identify aloud the line segment that best matched the target line segment. And of course, this is the subject and these are the two Confederates. Ash in 1955 found that 76% of participants conformed to the group pressure at least once by indicating the incorrect line. Conformity is the change in a person's behavior to go along with the group, even if he does not agree with the group. The Ash effect is the influence of the group majority on an individual's judgment. Research shows that the size of the majority, the presence of another dissenter, and the public or relatively private nature of the responses are key influences on conformity. The size of the majority, the greater the number of people in the majority, the more likely an individual will conform. There is, however, an upper limit, a point where adding more members does not increase conformity. In Ash's study, conformity increased with the number of people in the majority, up to 7 individuals. At numbers beyond 7, conformity leveled off and decreased slightly. The presence of another dissenter, if there is at least one dissenter, conformity rates drop to near 0. The public or private nature of the responses, when responses are made publicly in front of others, conformity is more likely. However, when responses are made privately, for example, writing down the response, conformity is less likely. In normative social influence, people conform to the group norm to fit in, to feel good, and to be accepted by the group. With informational social influence, people conform because they believe the group is competent and has the correct information, particularly when the task or situation is ambiguous. Since the line judgment task was unambiguous, participants did not need to rely on the group for information. Participants complied to fit in and avoid ridicule, an instance of normative social influence. Conformity is one effect of the influence of others on our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Another form of social influence is obedience to authority. Obedience is a change of an individual's behavior to comply with a demand by an authority figure. People often comply with a request because they are concerned about the consequence if they do not comply. Stanley Milgram was a social psychology professor at Yale who was influenced by the trial of Adolf Eichmann, a Nazi war criminal. Eichmann's defense for the atrocities he committed was that he was just following orders. Milgram, in 1963, wanted to test the validity of this defense, so he designed an experiment and initially recruited 40 men for his experiment. Now this is Milgram right here, and this is the box that he's going to use to test his subjects. The volunteer participants were led to believe that they were participating in the study to improve learning and memory. The participants were told that they were to teach other students, learners, correct answers to a series of test items. The participants were shown how to use a device that they were told delivered electric shocks of different intensities to the learners. The participants were told to shock the learners if they gave a wrong answer to a test item, that the shock would help them to learn. The participants believed they gave the learners shocks, which increased in 15-volt increments all the way up to 450 volts. The participants did not know that the learners were Confederates and that the Confederates did not actually receive shocks. In response to a string of incorrect answers from the learners, the participants obediently and repeatedly shocked them. The Confederate learners cried out for help, begged the participant teachers to stop, and even complained of heart trouble. Yet when the researchers told the participant teachers to continue the shock, 65% of the participants continued the shock to the maximum voltage and to the point that the learner became unresponsive. Several variations of the original Milgram experiment were conducted to test the boundaries of obedience. When certain features of the situation were changed, participants were less likely to continue to deliver shocks. When the setting of the experiment was moved to an off-campus office building, the percentage of participants who delivered the highest shock dropped to 48%. When the learner was in the same room as the teacher, the highest shock rate dropped to 40%. When the teacher's and learner's hands were touching, the highest shock rate dropped to 30%. When the researcher gave the orders by phone, the rate dropped to 23%. These variations show that when the humanity of the person being shocked was increased, obedience decreased. When the authority of the experimenter decreased, so did obedience. When in group settings, we are often influenced by the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of people around us. Whether it is due to the normative or informational social influence, the groups have power to influence individuals. Another phenomenon of group conformity is groupthink. Groupthink is a modification of the opinions of members of a group to align with what they believe is the group consensus. In group situations, the group often takes action that individuals would not perform outside the group setting because groups make more extreme decisions than individuals do. Groupthink can hinder opposing trains of thought. This elimination of diverse opinions contributes to faulty decision by the group. There are several causes of groupthink, which makes it preventable. When the group is highly cohesive or has a strong sense of connection, maintaining group harmony may become more important to the group than making sound decisions. If the group leader is directive and makes his opinions known, this may discourage group members from disagreeing with the leader. If the group is isolated from hearing alternative or new viewpoints, groupthink may be more likely. Several symptoms of groupthink include the following: perceiving the group as invulnerable or invincible, believing it can do no wrong, believing the group is morally correct, self-censorship by group members, such as withholding information to avoid disrupting the group consensus, the quashing of dissenting group members' opinions, the shielding of the group leader from dissenting views, perceiving an illusion of unanimity among group members, holding stereotypes or negative attitudes toward the outgroup or others with differing viewpoints. There are several strategies that can improve group decision-making, including seeking outside opinions, voting in private, having the leader withhold position statements until all group members have voiced their views, conducting research on all viewpoints, weighing the costs and benefits of all options, developing a contingency plan. Another phenomenon that occurs within group settings is group polarization. Group polarization is the strengthening of an original group attitude after the discussion of views within a group. If a group initially favors a viewpoint, after a discussion, the group consensus is likely a stronger endorsement of the viewpoint. Conversely, if the group was initially opposed to a viewpoint, group discussion would likely lead to stronger opposition. Group polarization explains many actions taken by groups that would not be undertaken by individuals. Group polarization can be observed at political conventions when platforms of the party are supported by individuals who, when not in a group, would decline to support them. Recently, some theorists have argued that group polarization may be partly responsible for the extreme political partisanship that seems ubiquitous in modern society. Given that people can self-select media outlets that are most consistent with their own political views, they are less likely to encounter opposing viewpoints. Over time, this leads to a strengthening of their own perspective and of hostile attitudes and behaviors toward those with different political ideals. Social traps refer to the situations that arise when individuals or groups of individuals behave in ways that are not in their best interests and that may have negative long-term consequences. Once established, a social trap is very difficult to escape. For example, following World War II, the United States and the former Soviet Union engaged in a nuclear arms race. While the presence of nuclear weapons is not in either party's best interest, Once the arms race began, each country felt the need to continue producing nuclear weapons to protect itself from the others. Talk about an arms race. Oh, bigger axe. Okay. Ah. Oh, he's got a gun. Ah. He's got a shotgun. Ah, he's got a cannon. He's got a bigger cannon. He's got a bigger cannon. Arms race. Social loafing involves a reduction in individual output on tasks where contributions are pooled. Because each individual efforts are not evaluated, individuals can become less motivated to perform well. Scientists reviewed the research on social loafing and discerned when it was least likely to happen. The researchers noted that social loafing could be alleviated if, among other situations, individuals knew their work would be assessed by a manager in a workplace setting or instructor in a classroom setting, or if a manager or instructor required group members to complete self-evaluations. The likelihood of social loafing in student work groups increases as the size of the group increases. According to research, college students were the population most likely to engage in social loafing. One study found that women and participants from collectivistic cultures were less likely to engage in social loafing, explaining that their group orientation may account for this. Social loafing. The opposite of social loafing occurs when the task is complex and difficult. In a group setting, such as the student work group, if their individual performance cannot be evaluated, there is less pressure for them to do well, and thus less anxiety or psychological arousal. This puts them in a relaxed state in which they can perform their best if they choose. If the task is a difficult one, many people feel motivated and believe that their group needs their input to do well on a challenging project. Sometimes in group situations, de-individuation occurs. De-individuation refers to situations in which a person may feel a sense of anonymity and therefore a reduction in accountability and a sense of self when among others. De-individuation is often pointed to in cases in which mob or riot-like behaviors occur, like January 6th. But research on the subject and the role that de-individuation plays in such behaviors has resulted in inconsistent results. And this may be one of the reasons why so many people participated in the January 6th riots and why so many people have gotten into trouble because they thought they were invisible. They thought they didn't realize people were taking films. Even if they did take films, there were so many people, why would they pick on them? De-individuation. The social groups we belong to help form our identities. These differences may be difficult for some people to reconcile, which may lead to prejudice toward people who are different. Prejudice is a negative attitude and feeling toward an individual based solely on one's membership in a particular social group. Prejudice is common against people who are members of an unfamiliar cultural group. Thus, certain types of education, contact, interactions, and building relationships with members of different cultural groups can reduce the tendency toward prejudice. Simply imagining interacting with members of different cultural groups might affect prejudice. When experimental participants were asked to imagine themselves positively interacting with someone from a different group, this led to an increased positive attitude toward the other group and an increase in positive traits associated with the other group. Imagined social interaction can reduce anxiety associated with intergroup interactions. Prejudice often begins in the form of a stereotype, that is, a specific belief or assumption about individuals based solely on their membership in a group, regardless of their individual characteristics. Stereotypes become overgeneralized and applied to all members of a group, This negative belief is overgeneralized in all members of the group, even though many of the individual group members may be completely different from our stereotype. And of course, this is of course, that's not cool. But for the longest time, the Cleveland Indians used the Indian logo, and the characterizations were fairly negative. They have changed their name now. It's been a couple of years. Now they call themselves the Guardians, and they've taken away the negative logo. Sometimes, and of course, the Washington Redskins for the longest time called themselves the Washington Redskins. Now they're the Washington Generals, Washington something. Not the Nationals. That's the baseball team. I can't think of the name. Sometimes people will act on their prejudiced attitudes toward a group of people, and this behavior is known as discrimination. Discrimination is a negative action toward an individual as a result of one's membership in a particular group. As a result of holding negative beliefs, stereotypes, and negative attitudes, prejudice about a particular group, people often treat the target of prejudice poorly, such as excluding older adults from their circle of friends. Racism is prejudice and discrimination against an individual based solely on one's membership in a specific racial group, such as toward African Americans, Asian Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, and European Americans. Research suggests cultural stereotypes for Asian Americans include cold, sly, and intelligent. For Latinos, cold and unintelligent. For European Americans, cold and intelligent. For African Americans, aggressive, athletic, and more likely to be lawbreakers. One reason modern forms of racism and prejudice in general are hard to detect is related to the dual attitudes model. Humans have two forms of attitudes: explicit attitudes, which are conscious and controllable, and implicit attitudes, which are unconscious and uncontrollable. Because holding egalitarian views is socially desirable, most people do not show extreme racial bias or other prejudices on measures of their explicit attitudes. Measures of implicit attitudes often show evidence of mild to strong racial bias or other prejudices. Sexism is a prejudice and discrimination toward individuals based on their sex. Typically, sexism takes the form of men holding biases against women, but either sex can show sexism toward their own or their opposite sex. Like racism, sexism may be subtle and difficult to detect. Common forms of sexism in modern society include gender role expectations, such as expecting women to be the caretakers of the household. Sexism also includes people's expectations for how members of a gender group should behave. Women are expected to be friendly, passive, and nurturing, and when women behave in an unfriendly, assertive, or neglectful manner, they often are disliked for violating their gender role. Research by Laurie Rudman in 1998 finds that when female job applicants self-promote, they're likely to be viewed as competent, but they may be disliked and are less likely to be hired because they violated gender expectations for modesty. Sexism can exist on a societal level, such as in hiring, employment opportunities, and education. Women are less likely to be hired or promoted in male-dominated professions such as engineering, aviation, and construction. People often form judgments and hold expectations about people based on their age. These judgments and expectations can lead to ageism, or prejudice and discrimination toward individuals based solely on their age. Ageism is widespread in U.S. culture, and a common ageist attitude toward older adults is that they are incompetent, physically weak, and slow, and some people consider older adults less attractive. Some cultures, including some Asian, Latino, and African American cultures, both outside and within the United States, afford older adults respect and honor. Typically, ageism occurs against older adults, but ageism also can occur toward younger adults. Raymer and colleagues in 2017 examined ageism against younger workers. They found that older workers endorsed negative stereotypes of younger workers, believing that they had more work deficit characteristics, including perceptions of incompetence. Another form of prejudice is homophobia, prejudice and discrimination of individuals based solely on their sexual orientation. Like ageism, homophobia is a widespread prejudice in the United States society that is tolerated by many people. Negative feelings often result in discrimination, such as the exclusion of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people from social groups and the avoidance of LGBTQ plus neighbors and coworkers. This discrimination also extends to employers deliberately declining to hire qualified LGBTQ plus job applicants. Prejudice and discrimination persist in society due to social learning and conformity to social norms. Children learn prejudiced attitudes and beliefs from society, their parents, teachers, friends, the media, and other sources of socialization, such as Facebook. And certain types of prejudice and discrimination are acceptable, and in society, there may be normative pressures to conform and share those prejudiced beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. When we hold a stereotype about a person, we have expectations that he or she will fulfill that stereotype. A self-fulfilling prophecy is an expectation held by a person that alters his or her behavior in a way that tends to make it true. When we hold stereotypes about a person, we tend to treat the person according to our expectations. This treatment can influence the person to act according to our stereotypic expectations, thus confirming our stereotypic belief. Research by Rosenthal and Jacobson in 1968 found that disadvantaged students whose teachers expected them to perform well had higher grades than disadvantaged students whose teachers expected them to do poorly. Another dynamic that can reinforce stereotypes is confirmation bias. When interacting with the target of our prejudice, we tend to pay attention to information that is consistent with our stereotypic expectations and ignore information that is inconsistent with our expectations. In this process, known as confirmation bias, we seek out information that supports our stereotypes and ignore information that is inconsistent with our stereotypes. We all belong to a gender, race, age, and socioeconomic group. These groups provide a powerful source of our identity and self-esteem. These groups serve as our in-groups. An in-group is a group that we identify with or see ourselves as belonging to. A group that we don't belong to, or an out-group, is a group that we view as fundamentally different from us. Because we often feel a strong sense of belonging and emotional connection to our in-groups, we develop in-group bias, a preference for our own group over other groups. This in-group bias can result in prejudice and discrimination because the out-group is perceived as different and is less preferred than our in-group. One function of prejudice is to help us feel good about ourselves and maintain a positive self-concept. This need to feel good about ourselves extends to our in-groups. We want to feel good and protect our in-groups. We seek to resolve these threats individually and at the in-group level. This often happens by blaming an out-group for the problem. Scapegoating is the act of blaming an out-group when the in-group experiences frustration or is blocked from obtaining a goal. A number of researchers have explored ways to reduce prejudice. One of the earliest was a study by Sharif et al. In 1961 known as the Robbers Cave Experiment. They found that when two opposing groups at a camp worked together toward a common goal, prejudicial attitudes between the groups decreased. Focusing on superordinate goals was the key to attitude change in the research. Humans engage in aggression when they seek to cause harm or pain to another person. Aggression takes two forms depending on one's motives, hostile or instrumental. Hostile aggression is motivated by feelings of anger with intent to cause pain. A fight in a bar with a stranger is an example of hostile aggression. Instrumental aggression is motivated by achieving a goal and does not necessarily involve intent to cause pain. A contact killer who murders for hire displays instrumental aggression. Oh, they're hitting each other. Laughing. There are many different theories as to why aggression exists. Some researchers argue that aggression serves an evolutionary function, this according to Buss in 2004. Men are more likely than women to show aggression. From the perspective of evolutionary psychology, human male aggression, like that in non-human primates, likely serves to display dominance over other males, both to protect the mate and to perpetuate the male's genes. Sexual jealousy is part of male aggression. Males endeavor to make sure their mates are not copulating with other males, thus ensuring their own paternity of the female's offspring. Although aggression provides an obvious evolutionary advantage for men, women also engage in aggression. Women typically display more indirect forms of aggression, with their aggression serving as a means to an end. Another form of aggression is bullying. Socializing and playing with other children is beneficial for children's psychological development. But not all play behavior has positive outcomes. Some children are aggressive and want to play roughly. Other children are selfish and do not want to share toys. One form of negative social interactions among children that has become a national concern is bullying. Bullying is repeated negative treatment of another person, often at adolescence, over time. One-time incident in which one child hits another child on the playground would not be considered bullying. Bullying is repeated behavior. The negative treatment typical in bullying is the attempt to inflict harm, injury, or humiliation, and bullying can include physical or verbal attacks. However, bullying doesn't have to be physical or verbal, it can be psychological. Research finds gender differences in how girls and boys bully others. Boys tend to engage in direct physical aggression, such as physically harming others. Girls tend to engage in indirect social forms of aggression, such as spreading rumors, ignoring, or socially isolating others. Bullying involves three parties: the bully, the victim, and witnesses or bystanders. The act of bullying involves an imbalance of power, with the bully holding more power, physically, emotionally, and or socially over the victim. The experience of bullying can be positive for the bully, who may enjoy a boost to self-esteem. However, there are several negative consequences of bullying for the victim, and also for the bystanders. Being the victim of bullying is associated with decreased mental health, including experiencing anxiety and depression. Victims of bullying may underperform in schoolwork. Bullying also can result in the victim committing suicide. Although there are not one signal personality profile for who becomes a bully and who becomes a victim of bullying, researchers have identified some patterns in children who are at a greater risk of being bullied. Children who are emotionally reactive are at a greater risk of being bullied. Bullies may be attracted to children who get upset easily because the bully can quickly get an emotional reaction from them. Children who are different from others are likely to be targeted for bullying. Children who are overweight, cognitively impaired, or racially or ethnically different from their peer group may be at higher risk. Gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender teens are at very high risk of being bullied and hurt due to their sexual orientation. With rapid growth of technology and widely available mobile technology and social networking media, a new form of bullying has emerged: cyberbullying. Cyberbullying, like bullying, is repeated behavior that is intended to cause psychological or emotional harm to another person. What is unique about cyberbullying is that it is typically covert, concealed, done in private, and the bully can remain anonymous. This anonymity gives the bully power, and the victim may feel helpless, unable to escape their harassment, and unable to retaliate. Cyberbullying can take many forms, including harassing a victim by spreading rumors, creating a website, defaming the victim, and ignoring insulting, laughing at, or teasing the victim. In cyberbullying, it is more common for girls to be the bullies, and victims because of cyberbullying is non-physical and is less direct it is a less direct form of bullying. Interestingly, girls who become cyberbullies often have been victims of cyberbullying at one time. The effects of cyberbullying are just as harmful as traditional bullying and include the victim feeling frustration, anger, sadness, helplessness, powerlessness, and fear. Victims will also experience lower self-esteem. Recent research suggests that both cyberbullying victims and perpetrators are more likely to experience suicidal ideation, and they are more likely to attempt suicide than individuals who have no experience with cyberbullying. The discussion of bullying highlights the problem of witnesses not intervening to help a victim. Researchers described a phenomenon called the bystander effect. The bystander effect is a phenomenon in which a witness or bystander does not volunteer to help a victim or person in distress. Instead, they just watch what is happening. Social psychologists hold that we make these decisions based on the social situation, not our own personality variables. The impetus behind the bystander effect was the murder of a young woman named Kitty Genovese in 1964. Social psychology, okay, what happened with Kitty Genovese was she was stalked and murdered in the street, right in the middle of the street. And she called for help, and she called for help, and people looked out their windows, and nobody helped her. And eventually, this took a while. I mean, it wasn't like she was raped and murdered. And this went on for a number of minutes, and nobody said anything, nobody did anything. There were lots of people in the buildings around where she was being raped and murdered, and nobody said or did anything. They didn't even call the police. They found her the next morning in a doorway, dead. Social psychologists claim that diffusion of responsibility is the likely explanation for the bystander effect. Diffusion of responsibility is the tendency for no one in a group to help because of the responsibility to help is spread throughout the group. Because there are many witnesses to the attack of Genovese, as evidenced by the number of lit apartment windows in the building, individuals assume someone else must have already called the police. The responsibility to call the police was diffused across the number of witnesses to the crime. In general, the greater the number of bystanders, the less likely any one person will help. Voluntary behavior with the intent to help other people is called prosocial behavior. Altruism is people's desire to help others, even if the costs outweigh the benefits of helping. People acting in altruistic ways may disregard the personal costs associated with helping. Some research suggests that altruism operates on empathy. Empathy is the capacity to understand another person's perspective, to feel what he or she feels. An empathic person makes an emotional connection with others and feels compelled to help. Research also shows that altruism is a form of selfless helping that is not motivated by benefits or feeling good about oneself. after helping people feel good about themselves, but some researchers argue that this is a consequence of altruism, not a cause. Other research shows that helping is always self-serving because our egos are involved and we receive benefits from helping. It is challenging to determine experimentally the true motivation for helping, whether it is largely self-serving, egoism, or selfless, altruism. The single most influential factor in determining with whom you become friends, and whom you have form a romantic relationship is known as proximity. You are more likely to be friends with people you have regular contact with. It is simply easier to form relationships with people you see often because you have the opportunity to get to know them. Wow, that's two strong kids. Similarity is another factor that influences who we form relationships with. We are more likely to become friends or lovers with someone who is similar to us in background, attitudes, and lifestyles. There is no evidence that opposites attract. We are attracted to people who are most like us. Sharing things in common will certainly make it easy to get along with others and form connections. When you and another person share similar music taste, hobbies, food preferences, and so on, deciding what to do with your time together might be easy. Homophily is the tendency for people to form social networks, including friendships, marriages, business relationships, and many other types of relationships with others who are similar. Homophily limits our exposure to diversity. By forming relationships only with people who are similar to us, we will have homogeneous groups and we will not be exposed to different points of view. Because we are likely to spend time with those who are most like ourselves, we will have limited exposure to those who are different than ourselves, including people of different races, ethnicities, social, economic status, and life situations. And this is exactly what happened when I was in college. When I went to college, the college that I attended was about 75% Greek. In other words, 75% of the people lived in fraternities, and 25% lived in dormitories or off campus. Because all the fraternities except one were segregated, in other words, African Americans weren't allowed to join, all the African Americans lived in the dormitory. And I was an independent. In other words, I lived in the dormitory too. But when I go back and look at what was going on back in 1967 through 1971, when I look back at what was going on, the people that lived in the fraternities, there were jock fraternities and there were doctor fraternities and lawyer fraternities. There were people that wanted to be doctors and lawyers and whatnot. There were sporting fraternities. They were very homogenous. All the groups were very homogenous, but none of them had any African Americans. And I think they really missed out because there was no diversity in their groups. The independents were people from everywhere with lots of different ideas. And I think that people that were independents were a lot better off than people that were in the fraternities for that very reason, just because we saw so much diversity. We experienced diversity. Once we form relationships with people, we desire reciprocity. Reciprocity is the give and take in relationships. We contribute to relationships, but we expect to receive benefits as well. We want our relationships to be a two-way street. We're more likely to like and engage with people who like us back. Self-disclosure is part of the two-way street. Self-disclosure is the sharing of personal information. We form more intimate connections with people with whom we disclose important information about ourselves. Self-disclosure is a characteristic of healthy intimate relationships as long as the information disclosed is consistent with our own views. Researchers have documented several characteristics that humans find attractive. We look for friends and lovers who are physically attractive, People differ in what they consider attractive, and attractiveness is culturally influenced. Research suggests that some universally attractive features in women include large eyes, high cheekbones, a narrow jawline, a slender build. Now, this is really old. I mean, this research was done in 1989, and a lower waist to hip ratio, and that was later on. That was about 5 years later, but it's still almost 30 years old. It is 30 years old. For men, attractive traits include being tall, having broad shoulders, and having a narrow waist. Both men and women with high levels of facial and body symmetry are generally considered more attractive than asymmetric individuals. Social traits that people find attractive in potential female mates include warmth, affection, and social skills. In males, the attractive traits include achievement, leadership qualities, and job skills. Although humans want mates who are physically attractive, this does not mean that we look for the most attractive person possible. This observation has led some to propose what is known as the matching hypothesis, which asserts that people tend to pick someone that they view as their equal in physical attractiveness and social desirability. We typically love the people with whom we form relationships, but the type of love we have for our family, friends, and lovers differs. Robert Sternberg in 1986 proposed that there are three components of love: intimacy, passion, and commitment. These three components form a triangle that defines multiple types of love. This is known as Sternberg's triangular theory of love. Intimacy is the sharing of details and intimate thoughts and emotions. Passion is the physical attraction, the flame in the fire. And commitment is standing by the person, the in sickness and health part of the relationship. Sternberg states that a healthy relationship will have all three components of love: intimacy, passion, and commitment, which is described as consummate love. Different aspects of love might be more prevalent at different life stages. Other forms of love include liking, which is defined as having intimacy but no passion or commitment. Infatuation is the presence of passion without intimacy or commitment. Empty love is having commitment without intimacy or passion. Companionate love, which is characteristic of close friendships and family relationships, consists of intimacy and commitment but no passion. Romantic love is defined by having passion and intimacy but no commitment. Fatuous love is defined by having passion and commitment but no intimacy, such as a long-term sexual love affair. According to social exchange theory, we act as naive economists in keeping a tally of the ratio of costs and benefits of forming and maintaining a relationship with others. People are motivated to maximize the benefits of social exchanges or relationships and minimize the costs. People prefer to have more benefits than costs, or to have nearly equal costs and benefits. But most people are dissatisfied if their social exchanges create more costs than benefits. Amber, I'll pay you $500 a month to pretend to be my friend on Facebook. All you need to do is leave me a public message every once in a while. What would make me a frienditude, but it's better if we don't name it. Frienditude, like prostitute. Should be his frienditude. And that is the end of the chapter. So I'll talk to you guys next week.